Julian Harris was a man who seemed to have it all. At 38 years old, he had already built a successful career as a civil engineer in the heart of Denver, Colorado. His recent promotion to project manager at one of the city's largest construction firms was the latest milestone in a journey that many envied. His life was structured and full of promise. He lived in a sleek, modern home in a fast-developing neighborhood, a testament to his hard work and ambition. His wife Laura was 33. She had once been a promising interior designer, her creativity matched only by her eye for detail. But after their first child was born, Laura made the decision to step away from her career and focus on raising their young family. As a stay-at-home mom, she poured her energy into their two children, keeping their home immaculate and running smoothly. Julian admired her dedication. They had a routine, one that was calm, predictable, and, to Julian, perfect. Mornings were spent with a cup of coffee before the chaos of getting the kids ready for school. Evenings were for family dinners, where they would sit around the table, share stories of their day, and laugh together. Julian had everything he had ever wanted: a thriving career, a beautiful home, and a loving family. He couldn't ask for more. But even in a life that appeared flawless, cracks were starting to form beneath the surface, though Julian couldn't yet see them. He was so absorbed in his work, pushing through complex construction projects and managing a team of engineers, that he didn't notice the subtle changes in Laura. At first, it was little things, like her quiet sighs as she sat with him after the kids went to bed, or the way she would linger in the kitchen, absent-mindedly washing dishes long after they were done. It wasn't long before Laura started spending more time away from home. She joined a local art club, a gathering of like-minded individuals who met every Thursday afternoon. The group engaged in a variety of creative activities, from painting to literary discussions. Julian supported her decision, recognizing that Laura needed something for herself, a way to express the creativity she had put on hold for motherhood. But as weeks went by, Julian noticed that Laura was coming home later and later. Sometimes she would return after the kids had already gone to bed, her explanation always the same: she had stayed late at an art workshop or seminar. At first, Julian didn't think much of it. He trusted Laura completely. She had always been the type of person who valued her independence, and he admired her passion for the arts. Yet, something gnawed at the back of his mind. There were moments when her stories didn't quite add up. When she mentioned attending an out-of-town seminar, Julian would occasionally notice her phone buzzing late into the evening. But whenever he asked, Laura would simply smile and brush it off. "Just work stuff," she'd say. "Nothing to worry about." Julian found it hard to dismiss the uneasy feeling creeping in. Was he overreacting? Was he just being paranoid? His thoughts swirled around in his mind like the steady hum of traffic outside his office. But he couldn't ignore the growing sense that there was more going on than he was being told. He had seen Laura's face light up when she talked about her art group, but he had also noticed the faint flicker of something else, something hidden beneath the surface. And so, on a warm autumn afternoon with the sun sinking low behind the city skyline, Julian decided to do something he had never done before. He called in sick to work, deciding that it was time to find out for himself just what Laura had been up to during her late nights out. He watched as she got ready for another Thursday evening. Her hair was styled carefully, and she slipped into a long, elegant dress that contrasted sharply with the casual attire she usually wore around the house. It wasn't a typical outfit for an art club meeting, but Julian didn't say anything. He simply watched, feeling a cold knot form in his stomach. "Where are you headed tonight?" he asked, his voice calm though his pulse quickened. "Oh, Laura replied with a smile, "just another workshop. I'll be back by 10. Julian nodded but felt his suspicion rise. He waited for her to leave before quietly slipping out of the house, careful not to make a sound. He got into his car and followed her from a distance, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't long before Laura's car turned off the main road and into an upscale residential area. Julian had never been here before. This wasn't the type of neighborhood where the art group typically met. His curiosity grew as he parked a few streets away and followed on foot. Soon, he found himself standing at the edge of a large, well-manicured lawn, peering through the dense trees that lined the property. The house before him was massive, a mansion with tall windows and sleek, modern architecture. Several luxury cars were parked outside, their shiny exteriors gleaming under the streetlights. Julian's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a workshop. It wasn't a seminar. Something was wrong. He edged closer, hiding behind a thick hedge, and climbed onto a low retaining wall to get a better view. From his vantage point, he could see groups of people entering the house, their voices carrying in the night air. The atmosphere felt different. He could feel the tension, the sharpness of excitement in the air. As the door opened, Julian caught a glimpse of Laura entering the house. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, his hand lightly resting on her back. He was tall, handsome, and far too familiar with Laura for Julian's liking. The man leaned in close, and Julian's heart sank as he watched them exchange intimate whispers. The door closed behind them, and Julian was left standing there, his mind racing with the unbearable realization that everything he thought he knew about his life was a lie. It was only a matter of time before Julian would confront Laura. But for now, all he could do was stand there, the cold night air pressing against his skin, his world shattering before his eyes. Julian stood frozen, unable to tear his eyes away from the mansion in front of him. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold night air biting at his skin as he leaned against the retaining wall, trying to steady himself. The figures in the house had disappeared behind the grand wooden doors, but the image of Laura walking in with that man was burned into his mind. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to leave, to get back in his car and pretend none of this had happened, but he couldn't. He was too far gone now. For the first time, Julian felt a deep sense of betrayal, something he couldn't quite comprehend at first. It wasn't just that his wife had been hiding something from him, it was the fact that she had been living a secret life, one that she had carefully concealed behind the facade of her art club meetings and late nights out. What was this? Was this a new relationship? Was it an affair? Or was it something deeper, something Julian couldn't even begin to fathom? The questions swirled in his mind as he stood in the shadows of the mansion, his eyes straining to catch any glimpse of his wife's return. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He had to know more. Without thinking, Julian began to walk toward the house. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if he were moving through water. He had to see for himself. What were they doing in there? Was it just an innocent gathering? Or was there more to it, something far more sinister? He made his way around the side of the house, moving cautiously in the darkness. The large property was silent, save for the occasional murmur of voices coming from inside. Julian pressed his ear against the cool stone of the wall, straining to hear anything that might give him a clue as to what was happening inside. He could hear laughter, the clinking of glasses, and faint music, but the words were too muffled to understand. He needed a better vantage point. The back of the house was lined with tall windows, offering a glimpse into the interior. Julian's heart raced as he crept along the wall, looking for a spot where he could peer inside without being seen. After a few tense moments, he found it, a small gap between two hedges that gave him a clear view of the large, open living room inside. He moved quietly, crouching low to the ground, and finally he saw her again. Laura was standing in the center of the room, her face flushed, talking animatedly to the man Julian had seen her with earlier. She looked different, more alive, more at ease than Julian had ever seen her in months. She laughed at something the man said, her hand brushing against his arm. The connection between them was undeniable. Julian's pulse quickened as he watched them interact, the image of Laura's smiling face searing into his mind. He felt a deep sense of helplessness, as if everything he had built with her, their family, their home, their future, was slipping through his fingers like sand. She was lost to him, lost to this hidden world she had been living. Suddenly there was a shift in the air. Julian felt it before he saw it. Something had changed in the room. The laughter had died down and a heavier silence filled the space. Julian's eyes flicked to the man beside Laura. He was standing closer to her now, his hand resting on her waist as they spoke in low tones. Julian's chest tightened. He couldn't take it anymore. He turned abruptly, backing away from the window, his mind racing with the need for answers. He had seen enough, too much. But what was he supposed to do with this knowledge? How could he confront Laura? Would she even admit to what he had seen? Or would she deny it all, just as she had with her late nights and unexplained absences? His head spun with the possibilities, but one thing was certain. He couldn't go back to that life. Not after what he had seen. He couldn't just pretend everything was normal again. Julian walked back to his car, his mind reeling from the shock. As he drove home, his thoughts raced. What had Laura been hiding? What had she gotten herself into? The man in the mansion was just a stranger to him, but he knew one thing: he had to find out everything. When Julian arrived home, the house was silent. The kids were already asleep, their small bodies curled up in their beds. He moved quietly through the house, feeling as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. He didn't know how much time had passed since Laura had left, but he knew he couldn't wait much longer. He needed to confront her, to lay everything bare. He tried to focus, to calm the storm inside him, but his thoughts were a blur. What would he say to her? How would he approach the subject? He had no answers. Only questions. It wasn't long before he heard the sound of the front door opening. Julian froze. Laura had returned. The house was still, the only sound the soft rustling of her coat as she stepped inside. Julian could hear her remove her shoes, the gentle thud of them hitting the floor. "Julian?" Laura called softly as though nothing was out of the ordinary. She was tired, her voice laced with the exhaustion of another late night. "I'm home." But Julian wasn't listening to her words. He wasn't focused on her tone or the way she carried herself. He was thinking only of the man, the mansion, and the life Laura had hidden from him. As she walked into the living room, Julian turned to face her. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, his eyes cold with the weight of everything he had learned. His silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, until Laura finally broke it. "Is something wrong?" she asked, the concern in her voice almost too much to bear. Julian's heart thudded in his chest as he met her gaze. "I know what you've been doing, Laura." Her face faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "What do you mean?" "I saw you," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "I saw everything." The silence between them felt like an eternity. Laura's expression shifted, and Julian could see the panic start to rise in her eyes. He was done pretending. He was done with the lies. "Where were you tonight?" he demanded. The room fell deathly silent. Laura stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and growing anxiety. Julian's words hung heavily in the air, his voice still vibrating with the anger he had barely been able to contain. He had waited long enough for the truth. Now there was no turning back. I don't understand," Laura stammered, her voice cracking slightly as she tried to make sense of the situation. Her hand instinctively reached for the wall as if steadying herself, but Julian could see her retreating into a defensive posture. It was the first time he had ever seen her look so vulnerable. "I saw you, Laura," Julian repeated, his voice growing sharper with each word. "I saw you with him at that house. The one you've been visiting every Thursday. What were you doing there?" Laura's eyes darted to the floor as she stepped back, as if she were trying to retreat from the truth. She opened her mouth, then closed it again as if unsure what to say. Her usual composure, the calm and serene woman Julian had known, had completely evaporated. "Julian, you don't understand," Laura finally whispered, her voice trembling. She took a hesitant step forward, then another as if she were trying to bridge the gap between them. But Julian wasn't ready to listen to excuses. He was past that point now. "I've watched you for weeks, Laura. I followed you because I couldn't keep pretending. I saw you at that mansion tonight, laughing with him, touching him. You can't hide from me anymore. I need to know everything." For a moment Laura didn't speak. She stood there, tears welling up in her eyes, her lips trembling. The look on her face wasn't one of guilt or remorse. It was something deeper, something that hurt Julian even more. It was a look of shame. I'm sorry, Julian. I should have told you." "I never meant for you to find out like this," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then what's going on, Laura? Why didn't you tell me?" "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back," Julian demanded, his hands clenching at his sides. Laura sank down onto the nearest chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The weight of her silence filled the room, heavier than anything Julian could have imagined. She glanced up at him, and for the first time in a long while, Julian saw vulnerability in her eyes. "Julian, she stopped herself, her face crumpling as she fought to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to spill over. "I didn't know how to tell you. I've been so lost, so confused, I didn't know where I fit in anymore. I thought I could get away with pretending, but I was wrong. You deserve the truth." Julian stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. She was lost? Confused? These weren't the words he expected to hear. He had thought he was living in a perfect marriage, a relationship built on trust and understanding. And yet here she was, confessing to something he could never have anticipated. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice barely a whisper but filled with raw emotion. His anger was starting to give way to something else. Something deeper, a sense of betrayal that cut through him like a knife. Laura took a shaky breath, then began speaking in a low, faltering voice. "It started when I joined the art group. I thought it would be a way to reconnect with myself, to find a piece of me that I had lost after becoming a mom. I needed something just for me, something that wasn't about taking care of everyone else. The club felt like a sanctuary at first, but..." She paused as though gathering the courage to continue. "The man you saw me with tonight, his name is Daniel," Laura continued. He's part of the art community, someone I met at a workshop a few months ago. At first we were just friends. He shared my passion for art and we had these late-night conversations about life, creativity, and everything in between. It felt like an escape from my routine. From the weight of everything I had to be for you and the kids. Julian's mind struggled to absorb her words. It wasn't a complete betrayal at first. But the more she spoke, the more his heart sank. And then what, Laura? Julian's voice broke through the tension in the room. What happened after that? How did it turn into what I saw tonight? Laura's shoulders slumped, and she squeezed her eyes shut as though bracing herself. It got complicated, Julian. I didn't expect it. I didn't plan it. But the more time I spent with Daniel, the more we connected. It was like a spark that I couldn't control. We began to talk more, meet more, and eventually, we got closer. And one night, after a few too many glasses of wine, we crossed a line. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. Julian felt his breath catch in his chest as the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal, it was something physical. It was everything he had feared, yet never imagined. Laura had been seeing someone else. I never wanted to hurt you, Julian, she said softly, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to stop it once it had started. I thought I could keep it separate from our life, but it was always eating at me, pulling me away. And now, everything is falling apart and I don't know how to fix it. Julian's chest tightened as he tried to process everything. The life he had built, the trust he had placed in Laura, all of it seemed to be crumbling in an instant. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second dragging on as Julian tried to come to terms with the magnitude of what he had learned. Laura looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Julian, I know I've hurt you. I know I've betrayed you. But please understand that it wasn't about you. I didn't stop loving you. I didn't want to hurt our family. Julian took a step back, shaking his head, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. He felt the overwhelming need to escape, to leave and clear his head. But he also knew there were no easy answers now. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a conversation. This was deeper, darker, and more painful than anything he had ever faced before. Do you love him? Julian's voice was barely above a whisper. He couldn't bring himself to say it any louder. The question hung between them like a heavy burden. Laura looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. I don't know. I don't know what to feel anymore. But I never stopped loving you, Julian. Never. But Julian was already walking away, his mind spinning. He didn't want to hear it anymore. The words didn't matter. The truth was too much to bear. As he walked toward the door, his heart felt hollow, like a part of him had been ripped away and thrown aside. He didn't look back as he left the house, stepping out into the night, into the unknown. Julian didn't know how long he had been walking. The cold night air nipped at his skin, but it barely registered. His mind was a swirling mass of confusion, disbelief, and anger. The streets of Denver, usually so familiar to him, felt foreign, like he was seeing them through a fog. Every step he took felt as if it were moving him further away from the life he had known. From Laura. He had walked for miles, not even realizing he had left the house and wandered into the heart of downtown. The familiar hum of the city, the distant sound of traffic, barely registered in his mind. He passed through darkened alleys and empty sidewalks, the neon lights from late-night diners casting eerie glows on the wet pavement. But none of it mattered. He had been betrayed. His world had shifted in an instant and nothing felt real anymore. His thoughts kept returning to the image of Laura with Daniel. The way they had been so at ease together, the way she had laughed, touched him. It wasn't just a physical betrayal, it was emotional. She had shared something with him that she had never shared with Julian. She had let someone else into a part of her life that was supposed to belong to him. His stomach churned with disgust. Every conversation they'd had, every touch, every shared moment of their marriage, now felt like a lie. How had it all gone so wrong? How had he been so blind? Julian slowed his pace as he reached a park bench under a streetlight, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. He sat down heavily, staring at the ground as his fingers clenched into fists. He wanted to scream, to shout, to break something. But all he could do was sit there, frozen, consumed by a deep ache in his chest. What now? What did he do with all this? The world seemed to have stopped spinning. His career, his family, everything he had worked so hard for, it all felt irrelevant now. Julian could barely even bring himself to think of the kids. How could he explain this to them? How could he face them knowing that their world, too, was about to shatter? His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Laura. He stared at the name for a long moment, the urge to ignore the call overwhelming. But he couldn't. He couldn't shut her out. Not yet. Not when everything was so raw, so uncertain. With a heavy sigh he answered, "Julian?" Laura's voice cracked on the other end, fragile and full of despair. "Please talk to me. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I will. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to fix it." Julian didn't speak right away. He just sat there listening to her desperate plea, feeling the sting of every word she spoke. The truth had already hit him like a freight train. There was no undoing it. No magic words that could make it better. No fix for what had been broken. "Why, Laura?" His voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "Why did you do this?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I honestly don't know. I was lost. I felt so disconnected from everything. From you. From us. Just happened, Julian. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I couldn't stop it once it started." Her words were filled with regret, but they didn't change anything. Julian knew that he couldn't just go back to the way things had been. Trust, once broken, couldn't be fixed so easily. And though he wanted to believe her, that she hadn't meant to hurt him, that she had just lost her way, he couldn't shake the image of her with Daniel. He couldn't shake the betrayal. "I don't think I can do this anymore, Laura," he said quietly, his heart breaking with each syllable. "I don't think I can keep pretending like nothing happened." "Please, Julian, don't say that," Laura pleaded, her voice desperate. "I love you. I swear I do. I made a horrible mistake and I can't take it back, but I'm willing to do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Julian squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the noise. Her words were empty to him now. They didn't make the hurt go away. They didn't erase the fact that she had been with someone else, someone who had become more than just a passing flirtation. She had crossed a line. And he couldn't find it in himself to forgive her. Not yet, not after everything he had seen. "I don't know if I can trust you again," he said softly. "I don't know if I can go back to how things were. I don't know if I even want to." There was a long pause, and Julian could hear her breathing raggedly on the other end of the line. "Julian, please. You have to understand this isn't about you. It wasn't about you or the family. It was me. I was the one who lost my way." Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside him. "You don't get it, Laura. It doesn't matter if it was about me or not. You still chose to do it. You still lied to me week after week. And now everything is ruined." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself for it. But please don't give up on me. On us." Julian sat silently for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed in second chances. He had always believed that love could overcome any obstacle. But this felt different. This felt like something that couldn't be fixed with just words or promises. His heart ached with the knowledge that no matter what Laura said, the foundation of their marriage had been shattered beyond repair. "I need time, Laura," Julian finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need time to think. I need time to figure out what I want, what I need. I can't keep going like this." "I understand," Laura whispered, her voice full of pain. "I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes. But please, don't give up on us completely." Julian didn't answer. Instead, he hung up the phone, his fingers trembling as he stared at the screen. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked out at the city, his mind still reeling. He had no idea what the future would hold. The days that followed were a blur for Julian. The world outside seemed to continue on as usual, cars honking, people walking by with their lives moving in every direction. But for Julian, everything felt like it had come to a standstill. He couldn't escape the questions that haunted him every moment, replaying the images in his mind. Laura with Daniel, the laughter, the intimacy, the betrayal. He couldn't stop seeing it. And he couldn't stop feeling it. The pain was constant, gnawing at him, never allowing him to find peace. Even when he was at work, sitting at his desk reviewing blueprints, the weight of what had happened pressed on his chest. He had tried to bury it. He had tried to focus, but the anger and hurt wouldn't go away. He avoided Laura's calls, her messages. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her, but he needed space, time to think. He had promised her he would give her an answer, but he hadn't even figured out what he wanted yet. He hadn't even figured out if he wanted to try to fix this. Julian would come home every night, and the house would be quiet, just as it had always been. But it no longer felt like home. It felt empty. There was no warmth, no comfort. Laura was there, but it was like she was a stranger now. The person he had known, the woman he had shared his life with, no longer seemed to exist in the same way. He would sit at the kitchen table, sometimes staring at the kids' drawings that covered the fridge, trying to remind himself of why he had to keep moving forward. But he couldn't do it. Not yet. One evening, as he sat in his living room alone, the doorbell rang and Julian's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He wasn't ready to face Laura, but he knew that he couldn't keep avoiding her forever. He opened the door and there she was. Laura stood on the doorstep, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her hair tangled and her clothes rumpled. The sight of her, broken and vulnerable, stirred something inside Julian. But it wasn't enough to erase what had happened. "I'm sorry," she said before he could say anything. Her voice cracked, thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything, Julian. I don't know how to make it right. I don't know if I can. But I'm here because I want to try. I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please just give me a chance." Julian stood there in the doorway, his body tense, his mind battling between the desire to comfort her and the cold, hard truth that he wasn't sure he could forgive her. The silence stretched between them for a long moment before Julian spoke. "You've hurt me, Laura," he said, his voice tight. "You've broken my trust. And no matter how much you apologize, no matter how much you say you're sorry, it doesn't change what you did." Laura looked down, her shoulders shaking slightly. "I know," she whispered. "I know I've lost your trust. But I swear to you I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far." Julian let out a frustrated sigh. "But it did, Laura. It went too far. You crossed a line and now everything is different. Everything's changed. And I'm not sure if I can go back to what we had before." She reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his arm. "Please don't give up on me. On us. I've been so lost without you. I know I messed up. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm here now. I want to fix it. I want to make things right." For a moment, Julian closed his eyes, struggling to find the right words. What was he supposed to say? What could he say? The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, everything felt too overwhelming to put into words. He had spent years building a life with her, and now, it all felt like it had been shattered in an instant. But deep down, Julian knew that this wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about something deeper. Something that had been missing between them for a long time. "Laura," he said, his voice softer now, "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if we can fix this. But I'm not ready to give up either. Not yet." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, relief flooding her face, but Julian could see the uncertainty in her expression too. She didn't know what this meant and neither did he. But for the first time in days he didn't feel completely hopeless. "I'm willing to try," he said quietly, the weight of his words sinking in. "But it's going to take time. It's going to take more than just apologies. It's going to take work. And I don't know if it will ever be the same." Laura nodded, wiping away a tear. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll wait. I'll be patient. I'll show you that I can earn your trust again." Julian stepped aside, allowing her to enter the house. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her steps slow and unsure, as though she were walking on fragile ground. As she closed the door behind her, Julian felt a faint flicker of hope. It wasn't much. It was just a small spark, a flicker in the darkness. But for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The days following Laura's return were a delicate dance. Julian had agreed to give their marriage another chance, but it wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt overnight. The small moments of tenderness, the quiet conversations over dinner, the fleeting smiles, all felt fragile, as though they could be shattered at any moment. But with each passing day something changed, even if just a little. The weight of the past was still there, heavy and unspoken, but Julian couldn't deny that there was a flicker of hope in their shared silence. Laura was determined. She began going to therapy as she had promised, and Julian agreed to join her. It wasn't easy for him to face the pain, but he knew that if there was any chance of salvaging their marriage, they needed help. Their sessions were filled with difficult questions and raw emotions, things they had never discussed before. But through it all, they learned to communicate again, to listen with empathy and patience. Julian had always been a man of action, a problem solver by nature. But this was different. There was no blueprint for fixing a broken heart, no formula for rebuilding a life that had been turned upside down. Every step forward felt like a battle between the desire to protect himself from further hurt and the hope that they could find their way back to the life they once had. As the weeks passed, things slowly began to shift. Laura was more present than she had been in a long time, not just physically but emotionally. She seemed to truly understand the depth of the pain she had caused and was willing to put in the effort to heal their wounds. Julian could see the sincerity in her actions, the small gestures that spoke louder than words. She would surprise him with his favorite meal after a long day at work, offer to take the kids so he could have some time to himself, or just hold him when he was feeling overwhelmed by everything. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when the weight of the betrayal seemed too heavy to bear, when Julian would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made the right decision. He would think about the future, the life they could build, the trust they could regain, and he would ask himself if it was worth the risk. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when Julian realized that he still loved Laura. Despite everything, despite the hurt, despite the lies, he still cared deeply for her. They had shared so much, years of memories, a family, a home, and he couldn't just throw it all away without trying. One Saturday afternoon, several months after the confrontation, Julian and Laura found themselves sitting on the porch of their home. The kids were at a playdate with a neighbor, and for the first time in a long time the house was quiet. Julian glanced over at Laura, watching as the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on her face. She was no longer the woman he had found walking away from him in the shadows of that mansion. She was different now, more honest, more open. The guilt that had once clouded her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but they were trying. Julian reached over, taking her hand in his, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The anger, the betrayal, the confusion, they were still there, tucked away in the back of his mind, but they didn't consume him anymore. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was willing to face it with Laura, one day at a time. "I'm sorry for everything, Julian," Laura whispered, her voice soft as though the words themselves carried all the weight of her regret. "I'll never make that mistake again." Julian squeezed her hand, looking into her eyes. "I know," he said, his voice steady. "But we have to keep working at this. We can't just forget about what happened. We can't pretend like it didn't hurt. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to rebuild." Laura nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll do whatever it takes. I love you, Julian. And I'm never going to stop fighting for us." Julian smiled softly, brushing the tear from her face. "I'm here, Laura. I'm here too." They sat in silence for a long while, watching the world go by, knowing that there were still many challenges ahead. The road to rebuilding trust was long and uncertain, but for the first time, Julian believed that it was possible. They had faced the darkness, and though it hadn't been easy, they were starting to find their way back to each other. Slowly, piece by piece, they were rebuilding the life they had once known. The pain of the past would always be there, a shadow in the background of their story, but it no longer defined them. Together, they would write a new chapter, one where healing and growth were possible. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. And in that moment, as Julian held Laura's hand, he knew that no matter what happened next, they were stronger for having faced the storm together.